This actually could push the Biden administration. As I mentioned, the Democrats are in a very rough position because this is a state matter, technically, right? This is a state law, and you could argue the federal government should not interfere in state prosecutions. In fact, part of the argument that you've been seeing coming out defending the Democrats, actually, is they're accusing the Republicans of trying to interfere with a state legal case by, for example, trying to get Alvin Bragg to testify before Congress, by criticizing the judge and the judge's family members who ironically work for the Democrats and Kamala Harris, which actually should qualify as bias, where the judge should recuse himself, but we'll see what happens. That if they were to give their 2 cents on it, they could be doing the very thing they're accusing Trump and the Republicans of doing, which is interfering with state law. And you could argue there's some legal, there's some legal ground for them not getting involved with that. The challenge they're having, though, is that whether it's in the United States or globally, this is being viewed as political persecution, not just prosecution, political persecution. And some of the biggest critics of the United States are using DA Alvin Bragg's case against Trump to point to the United States and say, look what you're doing. This is exactly what you accuse us of doing. They're accusing Joe Biden, basically, of being behind this. And they're saying this is the act of a dictator. This is the act of a tyrant. And you have, ironically, tyrants saying this. Chinese Communist Party being among them. Let me show you first off Mexican President AMLO. I'm not saying he's technically a tyrant. I think he's still pretty new on this, right? But he's criticizing he's criticizing Joe Biden on this, and the Democrats, and frankly, the American political establishment in general. He's saying President Donald Trump's arrest is politically motivated, and he's saying the world is watching, the world knows the truth. Keep in mind the broader context of this. The Chinese Communist Party, as we speak, is pushing a de-dollarization policy. They're getting France. France is trying to get most of Europe. They're getting the Arab countries, Saudi Arabia and Iran working together, Syria working together. They're getting all these different nations to drop the US dollar, and they're moving towards a new global reserve currency. The Chinese yuan. Now, you could argue that the dollar is still relatively stable, and the dollar, it's very hard to overturn it as the world reserve currency, but the CCP is pushing this, and they're using this case against Trump to make the American political establishment look like it has become tyrannical, look like it has become exactly what it criticizes in other nations, and by pointing to this, basically saying that America is destabilized, and they're arguing that their currency is more stable because of this. Now, I would disagree to some extent, even though I do believe this is politicized, and even though I do believe, my personal stance, even though I do believe this is probably, actually does look like political persecution. They're also not harvesting the organs of hundreds of thousands of people every year. They're also not throwing political prisoners in torture camps and re-education through labor camps. You could say that there are handfuls of individuals who are being wrongfully held in prison, including in solitary confinement, the J6ers in this case. But the scale and the degree of it in no way compares to the abuses, the genocide, the torture, and the killings the Chinese Communist Party carries out. But regardless of that, they're pointing to this and they're drawing comparison. They're saying, how can you criticize us if you're doing bad things as well? The concerning point with this, for example, the Mexican president, he's fighting back because there were Republicans right now saying that basically saying that we need to stop the cartels. We need to declare the cartels are terrorist organizations. They're killing, 70,000 Americans every year with fentanyl. They're bringing violence to America. They're engaged in human trafficking. I'll get into that later on because Biden's being accused of that as well now. And he's saying that, how dare you criticize me when you have problems? The narrative the CCP is pushing, the narrative that the Mexican president is pushing, the narrative a lot of America's enemies are pushing, is not that they want to stop these abuses of their own people. They're saying, how dare you criticize us of abusing our people when you also abuse yours? The nature of those accusations is that they don't want to fix the problems. They don't seem to intend to fix the problems. They're saying that by even suggesting another nation should, that because of the hypocrisy, there's no longer a global standard on human rights. America used to represent the global standard on human rights, and they're saying America has lost that talking point. Meaning the future we're facing now is one without a human rights standard, if this is allowed to continue. Emphasizing the challenge the Biden administration has. America is losing its influence politically. It's losing its influence in terms of telling America's story on the human rights standpoint and on the rule of law. And it's also losing the financial stronghold, which includes the ability to sanction other countries for violating human rights, that America has by having the dollar as the world reserve currency. And there's also other stuff as well. This is actually huge, folks. This is bigger than anything, in my opinion. This makes this a global issue, and frankly, this changes the entire last 100+ years of what America has represented on the world stage. If this is lost, human rights is gone. The standard of human rights is gone if this is not fixed, and so this is on Biden, unfortunately. But let me show you something else. This is the CCP saying it, folks. The Chinese Communist Party is trying to use this to its own advantage. The Chinese Communist Party is trying to create false equivalency. By creating false equivalency, right, between Trump and the prosecution of the J6ers and so on, well, the holding of them in solitary confinement, even while they're not facing, trial. They're drawing equivalency between this, between its own abuses. And they're saying that China issued a report about how dysfunctional U.S. democracy is at Biden's Democracy Summit. And they said this is the CCP. They say America's so-called democracy has been hijacked by interest groups and capital and brought instability and chaos to the world. Now, I want to emphasize this is propaganda. This is the Chinese Communist Party pointing to political instability and political problems right here in the United States to excuse far greater abuses of human rights. This does not represent a new standard on human rights. This represents a new standard without human rights, if the CCP narrative wins. Just emphasizing how much damage this is causing. This is not even just an American issue. This is a global issue. How much damage this is causing if this is not remedied, if justice is not returned, if the Biden administration doesn't step in and frankly maybe talk to Alvin Bragg or something like that. This is what's on the table. And for Joe Biden and the Democrat establishment, this is what they're going to have to weigh. You see, just emphasizing the difficult position they've been placed in. They could say that, they could hypothetically come out and say, Alvin Bragg, we disagree with him. He's become radicalized in much the same way that a lot of the Democrat media has, right? New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, right? They've generally done this. If the Democrat establishment, meaning Biden and people around him, don't come forward and make clear some kind of statement about maybe condemning political persecution, and start pushing back against the narratives of the CCP, or even pointing out the problems the CCP has, even though they have to an extent now, I should know. They're calling out, for example, organ harvesting, which is a major thing. We'll see if Biden signs it. If they don't push back, they're going to lose this global debate around what around what human rights are for the entire world, if they don't push back. And so this is what's on the table. The Democrats, Biden, they're in a very difficult position on how they deal with this very delicate balance between state issue, federal issue, and global issue of what America represents, the Pax Americana. And they're interestingly in China pushing a narrative that America is slipping into civil war. Now, if something goes viral in China, it is going viral because the CCP has allowed it to go viral. And oftentimes things only go viral when the CCP pushes it. And let me explain this a bit, because this ties into, I think, the fundamental issue that we're facing as a nation, and something I believe everybody feels to an extent. Let me go over this, and then I'll explain my analysis on it. Breitbart says this. And Breitbart, generally they tend to believe that America's unsalvageable. That's the narrative. They think there needs to be a system change, right? Generally speaking. So, keep in mind that, of course, when you read their stuff. But they say Chinese regime-approved social media users say Trump arrest could lead to U.S. civil war. It says Chinese Communist Party censors allowed users on its state-controlled site Weibo to comment extensively on the arrest of American former President Donald Trump on Tuesday, resulting in many cheering on the decline of the United States and predicting a civil war. They're cheering for this, folks. They want it. Further, it states that Weibo, the most popular Chinese regime-approved social media site in the country, had the news of Trump's arrest on its front page as of Wednesday morning Eastern Time, flooded with thousands of user comments. As the Chinese government strictly censors any content it considers contrary to Communist Party ideology or the interests of dictator Xi Jinping, observers can consider the thousands of reactions to Trump's arrest still publicly available to be consistent with Beijing's stance. In other words, if something goes viral in China, as I mentioned, it's because the CCP has allowed it to do so, because the CCP is ironically oftentimes promoting it. Many of the comments, it says, echoed propaganda in the pages of Global Times and Xinhua news agencies, two of China's biggest government-run propaganda sites. Some comments, as translated by the BBC, predicted that Trump's arrest would be the beginning of a civil war in America. Other users described the charges as political persecution, which I think is unfortunately accurate. The Washington Post also documented the Civil War predictions and noted that several commentators appeared to believe that Trump had already been convicted on the charges and would serve 136 years in prison. It says Trump faces a maximum of 136 years in prison, but isn't likely to be sentenced so harshly if convicted. It says, according to the Post, a Weibo hashtag on Trump's 136-year prison term received 400 million views by Wednesday afternoon local time. Now, there's two sides to this. In America, of course, I would like to believe we still do have some degree of rule of law. At the very least, it goes judge by judge, and it goes county by county, and it goes state by state. Not every judge is a Soros-funded cartel judge. Not every prosecutor is a Soros-funded cartel prosecutor. Not every politician is in cahoots with that politicized agenda, which is what it is. Not all of them are behind that. You can still get a fair trial in many parts of the United States. We still have, the Supreme Court still has decent integrity. And the justice system in America still holds up to a large extent.